Imagine for a second that you're sitting in a pitch-black cinema, right?
Right.
You are watching a film that literally has absolutely everything you could possibly want in a high society scandal. I am talking about vicious blackmail, a daring, chaotic courthouse escape, undeniable lesbian overtones, deep psychological masochism, and just to top it all off, a climax that directly involves Jack the Ripper. Now hold that image in your head, because here is the kicker. Imagine this film wasn't released on some sleek, prestige, modern streaming platform. Imagine it was unleashed on an unsuspecting public in 1929.
Are you having a laugh? You make it sound like some slick modern thriller, but let's be brutally honest right out of the gate here. We have this tendency to look at early cinema with, absolute rose-tinted glasses. You're hyping this up as a masterpiece, but truth be told, half of what you just described plays out on screen as a right mess.
No way, stop right there. That is absolute nonsense. What we are looking at today is sublime.
Sublime. Make people think of the 1920s as quaint, people tied to train tracks, exaggerated fainting, all that. This film tries to shatter that, sure, but it is clunky as hell in its actual execution. It's not a deception, it's a completely new visual vocabulary forged from scratch.
Cinema, the magic vehicle, a comprehensive guide. Journey 1, 1913 to 1950.
Hang on a minute, you have completely lost the plot already. We are examining Pandora's Box, or Die Büchse de Pandora, in the original German. Directed by Georg Wilhelm Pabst, it is a towering, visionary milestone of visual storytelling, and we've got a brilliant stack of excerpts from the film Historical Text Cinema, The Magic Vehicle by Klanowski and Garbitz. We're going to use their scholarship today to show you exactly how Pabst, alongside a 20-year-old American dancer, captured the absolute rot and decadence of the human psyche. It is pure magic.
Pull the other one. Pure magic. Listen to yourself. It's a fascinating historical artifact, I'll give you that, but the authors of that text are giving Pabst a massive free pass. Just to set the stage for you, the listener, we are talking about a massive production by Neurofilm AG, right? Produced by Seymour Nevenzahl. Nearly 3,300 meters of film, 3,265 to be exact. And honestly, you feel every single meter of it.
Oh, come on, you do not.
You do. It's an absolute slog in parts. A sprawling, bloated ego trip masquerading as psychological observation.
Let me stop you before you go any further. You're completely missing the forest for the trees. To understand why Pandora's Box is a stroke of brilliance and why it hit society like a sledgehammer, you have to actually understand the era it was born into. You can't just view it through the cynical lens of a modern critic sitting on a sofa with a smartphone. This was Weimar Germany. The 1920s, the age of total rebellion.
I know what era it was, but that doesn't excuse shoddy pacing.
It's not shoddy. The script, written by Ladislas Vajda and Joseph R. Fleisler, wasn't just pulled out of thin air to be edgy for the sake of it. It was adapted from two immensely controversial plays by Frank Wedekind, Erdgeist, Earth Spirit, and Die Büchse der Pandora. Wedekind was the ultimate provocateur.
Come off it. He was a shock jock. Wedekind, who lived from, 1864 to 1918, he just liked making polite people squirm. He defended free love and attacked the bourgeoisie because it sold tickets.
That is such a reductive take. He didn't just do it to sell tickets. He made it his absolute life's mission to expose the hypocrisy of the ruling class. We are talking about an era where polite society was entirely built on repressed desires, hidden affairs, and rigid public morality, right? While privately, it was an absolute cesspool of moral decadence. Wedekind looked at that contradiction and wanted to drag it screaming into the light.
Drag it screaming, yeah, very dramatic.
His plays, like Spring Awakening, were literally banned or heavily censored because they were designed to make comfortable people face their own filth. Pabst took that energy, that raw nerve, and translated it to the screen.
But look at the broader artistic zeitgeist of the time. If we actually connect this to the bigger picture, you have the futurist movement happening. Marinetti sparks the Manifesto of Futurism in 1909. Now, there was a movement with actual technical merit and a forward-looking vision.
Forward-looking. They were obsessed with cars.
They had a passionate, violent aversion to the past. They coined the term passéisme to describe anyone obsessing over historical rot. They worshiped speed, modern technology, aeroplanes, the sprawling industrial town. It was about the perfection of the machine and the triumph of humanity over nature. That is visionary.
Exactly. And that is precisely why Pabst's work is phenomenal. If the futurists were essentially the tech bros of the 1910s and 20s, obsessed with shiny new toys and looking upward at the sky, Pabst was providing the necessary grunge, punk rock counter-programming. He looked inward, down into the absolute sewer of the human condition.
And I'm saying wallowing in the sewer doesn't automatically make it high art. Pabst was obsessed with decadence, chaos, and destructive passions. He wasn't interested in human progress. He was fixated on the dark recesses of the psyche where our civilized facades completely crumble. He wanted to show the havoc wreaked on a depraved milieu by a woman of dazzling sensuality. But his execution, it's half-baked.
Half-baked.
Yes. He spends half the film wandering around these themes without a clear narrative drive. It's just scene after scene of people behaving terribly in slightly different rooms.
Wait, hold on. The narrative drive is the psychological decay. That is the point. And to capture that specific brand of human depravity, Pabst didn't just rely on standard European theater pantomime. He cast someone who completely anchored the chaos. This is where we get into one of the luckiest, most jaw-dropping casting choices in cinema history. He scoured America and found a 20-year-old named Louise Brooks.
Jaw-dropping, that's a stretch. It was a rare feat of luck, I'll grant you, but let's not pretend it was some grand, calculated masterstroke from day one.
Brooks was a dancer, a Ziegfeld girl. She had 14 films under her belt in America, sure. Howard Hawks even liked her. But she wasn't some massive, undisputed star in the U.S.
She was incredibly well known.
She had a terrible attitude for the studio system, and frankly, she failed to catch fire in Hollywood because she was difficult to work with.
She didn't fail because of a lack of talent. She failed because she refused to play the ridiculous Hollywood game. The source text explicitly points out that she had this striking beauty and raw talent that made her the 1920s equivalent of Marilyn Monroe. But the studio system wanted compliant, cookie-cutter starlets who just batted their eyelashes. Brooks was rebellious. She had that iconic, sharp bob haircut that practically defined the flapper era, but underneath it, she possessed an entirely different style of acting.
She just stood there. She did not just stand there. She didn't do the exaggerated, wide-eyed, silent film pantomime, right? She used micro-expressions. She brought a subtlety that Hollywood simply didn't know how to photograph yet.
I don't buy it for a second that her U.S. career stalling was just because she was too rebellious. The environment in Europe simply masked her limitations. But, to be fair to the text, she did shine for a brief window in Europe. When Pabst cast her as Lulu, he essentially cast the literal personification of sensuality, and frankly, she's the only reason this film is even remotely watchable.
So you admit she grounds it. Let's examine this Lulu effect, because it is central to why this movie works on every level. Lulu is described as an innocently amoral girl. She has this elegant swan neck, this beautiful, disarming smile, but she is an absolute vortex of destruction. When she's on screen, every other character is utterly magnetized to her. Pabst knew that if he cast a traditional actress who, played evil, the whole thing would fall apart. He needed someone who just effortlessly existed as a siren.
Yes, but this raises a massive issue with the film itself. The text we are analyzing literally admits that Brooks dominated the picture to such an extent that she smoothed over the imperfections of the plot. Without her, the authors concede, the film would have devolved into heavy-handed, abstract symbolism. So you are basically admitting that Pabst's directorial framework was laughably weak.
I am not admitting that at all.
It was a shoddy, abstract mess that got bailed out by a charismatic 20-year-old who happened to look great on camera. If your masterpiece relies entirely on one actor dragging it across the finish line, it's a total train wreck of a script.
No, you're looking at it completely wrong. I'm saying the synthesis of director and muse is what creates a masterpiece. She made the chaos irresistibly convincing. She took this heady, intellectual German script about the moral decay of the bourgeoisie and breathed sweaty, messy, authentic life into it. You couldn't look away from her. And that gravitational pull is exactly what makes the plot's relentless downward spiral so devastating. Yeah. Let's actually look at that plot, because the descent is structured brilliantly.
Brilliantly. The pacing is a total train wreck. But fine, let's deconstruct the plot. They streamlined Wedekind's ridiculously complicated plays to focus solely on Lulu's liaisons. We start in high society. Lulu has a wealthy protector, Ludwig Schoen, a powerful newspaper publisher. He's engaged to the daughter of the Minister of the Interior. So he's got all this bourgeois respectability to protect, and he initially refuses to marry Lulu.
He's desperately trying to keep his neat, respectable public life completely walled off from his absolute undeniable obsession with her. It's the ultimate Weimar hypocrisy. But it blows up spectacularly. He is caught in flagrante delicto, caught red-handed by his fiancée. And crucially, he's also caught by his own son, Alwa. The sheer psychological weight of that moment on screen is phenomenal work.
It's soap opera melodrama.
It's not a soap opera. It's the total collapse of a powerful man's reality.
Schoen's honor is ruined, so he's forced to marry Lulu to salvage whatever control he has left. But the supposed escalation on their wedding night, It's completely ragged around the edges. Shone discovers that Lulu hasn't just ruined his engagement, she's been seducing his son, Olwa, the whole time. His civilized life collapses.
And his reaction is unmatched in silent cinema. The boundaries of his sanity just snap. He is so utterly broken by this realization that he drags Lulu into a room, hands her a gun, and orders her to kill herself. It is this incredibly dark, suffocatingly masochistic climax to their entire power dynamic. He wants her to punish herself for his own degradation. But there's a struggle, the gun goes off, and Shone ends up dead.
And from there, the film just completely loses the plot. This act of violence sends Lulu tumbling down the social ladder. Sure, she's put on trial, sentenced to 5 years. But then we get this courthouse escape sequence.
Which is fantastic.
You're taking the mick. A fire alarm goes off, orchestrated by her accomplices Alwa, who is still inexplicably under her spell, the Countess Geschwitz, and this shady old man named Shigolch, who used to be her protector. It plays out like an amateurish heist movie crammed into a psychological drama.
Let me stop you before you go any further. It's not an amateurish heist. It's the fracturing of society. This bizarre, dysfunctional, found family of outcasts is forced to flee Germany. They descend into France, and the setting reflects their moral decay perfectly. They go from opulent, brightly lit bourgeois apartments to this dingy, shadowy, desperate life in a gambling den, and the vultures immediately start circling. Lulu is blackmailed by Rodrigo Class, who threatens to turn her in if she doesn't pay him off.
This whole middle section in France is utterly flat. You could chop 40 minutes out of the middle of this picture, and you might actually have a watchable, concise psychological thriller. It's just a redundant cycle of people being mean to Lulu and Lulu staring blankly back at them.
You're completely missing the overarching theme. It is the necessary, agonizing progression of a depraved milieu. You have to feel the weight of their descent. They are constantly forced into darker, more claustrophobic corners. They flee France and end up in the foggy, damp East End of London. They hit the absolute bottom of the barrel. Lulu, who started the film as the kept woman of a multi-millionaire publisher, is now shivering in an attic, forced to resort to street prostitution on Christmas Eve just to buy a crust of bread for her pathetic companions.
Okay, the setup for the climax is visually striking, I won't deny that. The London fog is atmospheric. She goes out into the street to find a client, and in what has to be the most on-the-nose twist in cinematic history, she literally meets Jack the Ripper.
And it is a stroke of absolute pitch-black brilliance. Look at how Pabst handles this. It's not a violent ambush.
Yeah.
When Jack the Ripper meets Lulu, he's mesmerized. The text explicitly notes that her charm, her innate innocent kindness in that moment, actually works on him. He consciously decides not to kill her. She manages to soothe the most notorious monster of the 19th century.
Oh, come off it. So she cures a serial killer with a smile, but then they go up to her room, and simply because they're sitting by candlelight, he suddenly has a psychotic fit and stabs her to death. That's a stretch, even for a silent film. The trigger makes no psychological sense. It's just Pabst needing a bloody end to justify his heavy-handed morality tale.
Are you having a laugh? It makes perfect psychological sense. The candlelight triggers his trauma. The tragedy is absolute. The woman who inadvertently destroyed every single civilized person around her is ultimately destroyed by a complete outcast who couldn't control his own dark impulses. It is the ultimate irony. Pabst isn't just punishing her for being sexually liberated. He's mapping the inevitable destruction of a society that refuses to acknowledge its own base desires.
I don't buy it. You keep talking about this profound psychology, but Pabst is just using taboo subjects for cheap shock value. He's throwing everything at the wall just to see what offends the censors the most.
No, the source text explicitly highlights the film's impressive psychological observation. The authors use the word unprecedented, and they are entirely accurate. Pabst was breaking taboos that cinema wasn't even allowed to whisper about back then. Look at the deep, agonizing masochism of Shone Sr. His relationship with Lulu isn't about pleasure. It's about the pain of his own degradation. And equally groundbreaking, in 1929, was the inclusion of undeniable lesbian overtones through the character of Countess Geschwitz.
Yes, the Countess is part of the eclectic crew. She is completely, tragically devoted to Lulu. But again, Pabst frames this entirely as a symptom of depraved milieu. He's pathologizing it. He's looking at masochism and same-sex attraction and lumping them in with murder and blackmail to create his edgy little circus. It's the work of a narcissist behind a lens who just wants to push buttons.
That is entirely unfair to the historical context. He wasn't lumping them together to condemn them. He was showing that all human desire, when repressed and twisted by polite society, leads to chaos. The Countess is arguably the most noble character in the entire film. She literally sacrifices everything for Lulu. And that brings us to the crux of Wedekind's original provocation. Is Lulu actually a villain? Or is she just a mirror?
She's an amoral vacuum. She isn't a calculating mastermind plotting everyone's downfall, I'll give you that. She simply exists, acting on her impulses without restraint. But to call her a mirror is too generous. Everyone around her is just an idiot. They are drawn to her like moths to a flame, and they destroy themselves. Pabst needed these taboo elements not to show the unvarnished human condition, but because his plot was so thin, he needed controversy to keep the audience awake.
Look, the academic foundation in cinema. The magic vehicle is razor sharp on this point. Klonowski and Garbage break down how Pabst wasn't just throwing controversial shots together, he was forging a completely new cinematic vocabulary from scratch. They rank this as a towering milestone for a reason. He pushed the medium forward because he had the sheer guts to execute a vision nobody else could even comprehend. To make this boundary-pushing material work without it feeling exploitative, Pabst employed a masterful, highly specific visual style.
Come off it. I reckon the authors are giving him a massive free pass here. You call it visionary courage, but from where I'm sitting, it looks like a colossal ego trip. Just because a filmmaker spends a fortune, tortures his crew, and drags out every scene doesn't automatically make it art. He was a narcissist behind the lens, and I think the book is completely romanticizing what is essentially a tedious, overblown project.
Nonsense. You're completely missing the forest for the trees. It's not an ego trip, it's spatial innovation. The book provides the precise historical context and technical breakdowns that directly influence modern cinema. If your attention span finds high-level visual storytelling a bit of a grind, that's your problem, not the film's. Let's actually look at the cinematic canvas. Because in the 1920s, German cinema was dominated by heavy expressionism. Jagged, painted sets, highly distorted perspectives designed to mimic a fractured mind. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari style, right? But Pabst didn't do that. He achieved his expression through realism.
And that realism often just looked like sheep sets. Let's talk about the photography by Gunther Krampf. The text says it swings between strong expressionism, harsh, contrasting light and shade, and misty impressionism, but honestly, half the time the lighting is just a right mess. It's inconsistent.
It's not inconsistent. It's a deliberate technical evolution. The most crucial innovation Pabst utilized was a lighting technique he borrowed directly from Max Reinhardt's theater. Listen, let me explain exactly how this works, because it literally changed cinema. Pabst used incredibly bright lighting directly on his actors, but set them against a very deep, intentionally darker background.
Yeah, and it makes them look like they are standing in front of a void. It disconnects them from the environment.
That is the entire point. It creates a profound sense of three-dimensional cinematic space. Think about the mechanics of portrait mode on a modern camera. What does it do? It forces the lens to keep the subject perfectly lit and in sharp focus while artificially blurring and deepening the background so the person absolutely pops off the screen. It isolates them. Pabst was doing exactly this, mechanically, but with massive, heat-radiating primitive stage lights in 1929. He was forcing you, the audience, to focus intensely on the psychological isolation of the characters while still making you feel the heavy, oppressive space of the room around them.
I'm evaluating what's actually on the screen, mate. It's 50% brilliance and 50% unmitigated chaos. The book defends every single frame through a cozy historical lens, but any rational viewer today would tell you to throw half that footage in the bin. The spatial awareness is fine, but the editing. Pabst, along with Joseph R. Fleisler and Mark Sorkin, edited it themselves, and the cuts are jagged.
The cuts are dynamic. The text specifically praises the highly dynamic, finely intercut takes. By cutting quickly between micro-expressions on Louise Brooks's face, the reactions of the men she's destroying, and that deep spatial background, Pabst creates a terrifyingly fluid atmosphere. The rhythm of the editing physically mimics the psychological chaos of the characters. It makes the descent into London feel tangible. Jack the Ripper doesn't feel like a theatrical boogeyman. Because of the grounded realism and the lighting, he feels like a terrifyingly real threat emerging from the actual fog.
You can praise the editing all you want, but a clunky script is a clunky script. The grounded realism just makes the absurd coincidences of the plot stand out even more. It's a film at war with itself. It wants to be a gritty, realistic psychological study, but it relies on melodramatic fire alarms and sudden candlelight-induced psychosis to get to the finish line.
Look, we've argued through dozens of these early cinematic milestones, and we're clearly never going to see eye to eye on Pabst. I think he took Frank Wedekind's aggressively anti-bourgeois plays, found the ultimate conduit in Louise Brooks, and used unprecedented psychological depth and brilliant spatial lighting to create a towering masterpiece. You think it's a bloated, half-baked train wreck saved by a pretty face.
Spot on. And if you want to judge for yourself whether I'm just being an insufferable cynic or if the book actually proves its point about Pabst being a visionary genius, go grab a copy of Cinema, the Magic Vehicle. Do you have the actual appetite to digest real film history, or are you staying lazy and just taking my colleagues' overly enthusiastic word for it? Your call.
Read the book, watch the film, and decide for yourself. But as you do, I want to leave you with one final, lingering philosophical dilemma straight from the text. The authors describe Lulu as innocently amoral. She doesn't actively intend to cause harm. She is simply existing, following her own nature without the hypocritical restraint of society. Yet, her mere existence and charm leave a trail of destroyed lives, ruined fortunes, and literal dead bodies in her wake.
So the question you have to ask yourself is, who's truly at fault? Are the men who greedily project their own repressed desires onto her the real villains of the piece? Are they destroying themselves? And more importantly, are you, as the audience member watching this play out, complicit? Because you, too, find her dazzling sensuality and her chaotic orbit irresistibly convincing.
Exactly. Think about the modern Lulus in our media landscape today. Are we still just moths flying blindly into the exact same beautiful flame that Pabst lit almost a century ago? Think about it.
Or maybe they're just watching a laughably weak plot unfold and wondering when the credits will roll.
Oh, you were absolutely impossible. We'll let the listeners decide.